How y'all doing? Many of you who came to my channel probably came through my videos involving paleontology. And as much as I still love paleontology to this day, in fact I still do volunteer work at the San Diego Museum of Oklahoma Natural History in a vertebrate paleontology lab. Many of you may not have access to that, but you still want to get involved. Let's say you're fascinated with fossils in general, not just dinosaurs. Maybe you live out near a road cut, or you have land in the countryside, or have relatives that do. It has exposed rock that you actually find fossils into it. Now, when I was a kid, my grandparents on my mother's side lived outside Ponca City, and they lived in as an underground house. That's basically a house where basically the backyard's over the top of the house itself. It was very good against tornadoes. They're wonderful they were wonderful, almost kind of like a hobbit hole in a sense. A friend of mine called it that. And in order to build this, they had to cut into the bedrock, which in Oklahoma, in that part, it was a lot of limestone. Later I found out it was Permian age. But they had to cut into that, and that rock they cut out was thrown down a hill, which was next to the driveway. Now, as a kid, we would climb down these jagged rocks, that were just in all sorts of directions, but they were packed full of fossils, shells and all. So they were down the hill and also on the side of the house. And I used to enjoy looking for those and picking out the small rocks to see if there's any fossil shells I can find. And mostly had brachiopods and crinoid stems. And that's why I call it. I would love to go back there, but my grandparents are long since gone. They sold the house, so don't have much access to that. But I'm digressing a bit. The point is that I had access to fossils like that when I was a kid, and you have fossil books for kids. My father got me a deal of from Bryce's bookstore, if I recall, back in the 80s, and it was basically a box with a big packet of fossils mixed in with these little volcanic pebbles. The idea is you open up the box, you open the pack, you pour it in. Kind of reminds me of a bag of cereal, and then you search. They give you a brush, and you carefully remove the little volcanic sand there till you find the fossils. You pick it up and you try to identify it, and it came with this little book. Golden Guide of Fossils. This book was written back in the 60s, and it's not a bad guide and all. It's nicely illustrated. Tells you all about fossils and how to identify them and all that. I looked through this now. It's like, yeah, this is pretty good if you sit down and read it. But the problem is, it's made back in the 60s. A lot of paleontology has moved forward. The terminologies have changed. It's a little bit out of date. You can find other books, like field guides like these, and even if they are still within date, it could be kind of intimidating to read through all this text if you're not familiar with all that. I found this book I got on sale from Hastings years ago, and again, same thing, beautifully illustrated. It talks about mollusk class and all that, but may not mean much if you're just reading it straight through. It's like they're organized for the average layperson. But what if there's a book out there that's perfect for people from young people to adults, a very broad audience that tells what paleontology is about, particularly in collecting fossils, and it's just a great field guide. Well, not exactly field guide, but it's a great book for starting off in understanding collecting fossils and all that. And that is Fantastic Fossils by Donald R. Prothero. Now, I'll read from the words from the man himself. Let's see. The idea for this book was originally suggested by my former editor at Johns Hopkins University Press, Dr. Vincent J. Berg, working with talented illustrator Mary Persis Williams. Vince envisioned a book that would illustrate the explained fossils and paleontology to the broadest possible audiences, from young adults to fossil enthusiasts of every age. But we didn't want it to be a simple field guide with a lot of illustrations of common fossils. There are plenty of those books, and many of them are badly out of date. Instead, I explained the fundamentals of paleontology and how to collect and identify fossils, providing practical information for any interested student or collector. Much more detailed information is presented here than you will find in picture guides to fossils, much as like the ones I showed here. Alright, and I hope this book provides enjoyable reading, not just for rock hounds and hobby collectors, but also for those who want a bit to learn more about fossils and how paleontologists study and understand them. It is suitable for introductory college classes in which students are learning a bit about paleontology but don't need an advanced level college textbook. So I have chosen a mix of stories and illustrations of important and commonly collected fossils, along with some of the more interesting extreme fossils that are only seen in museums. And this book does exactly what he does. First few chapters, he talks about the basics of fossils, where to find them. He talks about fossils, how they're formed, where to find them, what kind of rocks to look into, what are the dating methods that are used to tell how old they are relative to each other, and for radiometric dating and how that works. He talks about how things are named, how things are given names, nomenclature, and everything like that. And then the next several chapters, starting at 11, he goes through the different types of fossils you can find. Now, this book is very good from going to the order level of identification. So, in other words, for those of you, the classification, you usually have phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. But he only goes through the phylum, the class, and the order. And for beginners, that's enough. He gives great examples of how to identify, down to that level. And that, but if you want to go further down to the species level, you have to find more advanced books than that. But that's okay, because it's good for beginners, and you don't, not overburdened by all the terminology and everything. And that, I think, is all that. It's wonderfully illustrated, mostly black and white, but there's a few center pages that are in color, and these are colored versions of what he shows in the black and white. He talks about nomenclature, but for instance, you see a trilobite. Why is it called a trilobite? Because it has 3 lobes, and it talks about all the parts, how to identify them. I'll just go over the chapters and see what he talks about. The first chapters on Prothero, those are your sponges. He talks about Cnidaria, those are your sea anemones, your corals, and sea jellies. This will also include jellyfish, but those have soft bodies that rarely preserve in the fossil record. Brachiopoda, which are brachiopods and lamp shells. You may think of them like mollusks, like bivalves, but they're structurally different, and he explains how to identify that. Bryozoans, those look like these big fans with holes in it, kind of plant-like, but they're actually a colony of things. He explains their structure, and I've collected a few of those myself. Arthropoda, mostly trilobites and their relatives. Trilobites are arthropods, but also there's crustaceans, insects, and and all that. Phylum Mollusca, that includes your clams, snails, squids, and their relatives. Echinodermata, that is your sea star, sea urchins, and their relatives. For instance, you look at the crinoids; those are echinoderms, if I recall. Let's see, hemochordates, those are your grapholites. And now these are pretty much, think of sort of tooth-like wishbones in a lot of cases, to give you an idea. Then there's chordata. That includes your fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals, and he has a chapter on paleobotany. So it's very good on that. Now, it's not so extensive on the chordates. It includes your vertebrates, but he does go over a lot of the animals, to the class reptiles, anapsids, turtles, and relatives. He gives good examples of that. Vertebrates, while it's not impossible to find in the field, depending on where you're at, you more likely will encounter invertebrates, and that's where he covers more in depth. But down to the order level for those, he goes into the class level for the vertebrates. And again, that's fine, because some of you can identify quite readily, but if you find 1 or 2 bones, it may take a bit more specialist look into that. But I'm digressing. But the point is, if you're a fossil enthusiast and want to get started, but you're kind of, for the layperson, you got a problem here. It's either way too simple for kids, or it's almost way too complicated. Textbooks and field guides may be too intimidating, may turn you off a bit. What's a good book to start that can give you your first step towards into this field, and it's not too complicated, is nicely told, reads well, where you are collecting fossils or not. It's just good explanation about paleontology and fossil collecting in general, and this book does it. Fantastic Fossils by Donald Prothero, and it's up to date. It's only this one's only about a year or so old. Let me check the copyright. Let's see. Don't let me read this, but this one is only 2020. So I'm doing this back in 2021, so it's not, and it does a very good job. Prothero is a geologist and paleontologist. He has written many books, both for lay people and textbooks. He's very good at explaining it, in not too simplistic terms, but he explains it in a way that is satisfactory to those who want to know. So I've already reviewed a couple of his books, The Story of Dinosaurs and 25 Fossils, and his book on Indricotheres. Both I recommend, which I've also did reviews on. So there you go. Fantastic Fossil by Donald Prothero. Check this book out for your fossil needs, fossil information needs, and hopefully you can use this to get started in your fossil collecting and wherever you may find them. So thank you all for watching and have a nice day.